I caught her before she hit the ground. That's the moment everything changed. Not the phone call I got 3 weeks earlier, not the bruise I thought I imagined at Thanksgiving, not the way my brother-in-law always seemed to position himself between my sister and the door at family gatherings. No, it was the moment her knees buckled on my front steps at 6:30 on a Tuesday morning, and I caught her weight in my arms, and I felt how light she'd gotten, and I knew. I had waited too long. Her name is Claire. She's 2 years younger than me, and she has our mother's eyes, and our grandmother's stubbornness, and a laugh that used to fill every room she walked into. Used to. When I pulled her inside my house that morning and sat her down at my kitchen table under the fluorescent light, I had to force myself not to react to what I saw. There was a cut above her left eyebrow, already scabbed over, a bruise along her jaw that had yellowed at the edges, meaning it wasn't new. She was wearing long sleeves in late August. I sat across from her. I didn't reach for her hands right away. I've learned, from my years working as a detective in the Fulton County Sheriff's Office, that the worst thing you can do to someone in shock is rush them. I just said, "Take your time." She stared at the table for a long moment. Then she said I didn't know where else to go. "You don't need a reason to come here," I said. "You never need a reason." She nodded. Her hands were wrapped around the mug of coffee I'd made her, and she was squeezing it like it was the only solid thing in the world. "How long?" I asked. She didn't pretend not to understand the question. "About 2 years," she said quietly. I kept my face still. 2 years. My little sister had been living inside that for 2 years, and I had missed it. I had seen her at Christmas and at Easter and at Mom's birthday in June, and I had missed it. That knowledge sat in my chest like a stone, and I made myself leave it there because Claire didn't need my guilt right now. She needed me to be the person I was trained to be. "Does he know you're here?" I asked. She shook her head. "He thinks I went to the pharmacy. I have maybe 40 minutes before he starts calling." "Okay," I said. "Then let's use them." Her husband's name is Derek Calloway. I want you to understand who Derek Calloway is because he is not the man most people think he is. He coaches youth baseball on Saturday mornings. He brings casseroles to church potlucks. He holds doors open for elderly women at the grocery store, and he has one of those handshakes that makes men feel like they've just been evaluated and approved. He is, by every external measure, a good man, a solid man. The kind of man you'd want your daughter to marry. Claire met him at 24. She was finishing her nursing degree. He was charming and steady, and he made her feel safe. That's the word she used later. Safe. She said she never understood the irony of that word until much later. In the beginning, it was small things. Criticism wrapped in concern. "Are you really going to wear that?" Delivered with a smile that made her feel foolish for being bothered by it. Then it was the money. He suggested, gently, that it made more sense for her to be on his account. Easier that way. Less complicated. Then it was her friendships, one by one, quietly discouraged. Her friend Mara was too dramatic. Her college roommate was a bad influence. Her own sister, me, was too intense, and he said it just often enough that Claire started calling less. I didn't push. I should have pushed. Then the first time he hit her, he cried. He held her face in his hands, and he wept, and he told her he didn't recognize himself, and it would never happen again. She believed him. Anyone might have believed him. He was so convincing in his remorse that she told herself she had imagined the version of him that had done it, that maybe she had provoked it, that maybe she hadn't been reading him right, that maybe this was just what marriage was and nobody talked about it. It happened again 4 months later, and again. She sat at my kitchen table and told me all of this in a flat, careful voice, like she was reading from someone else's file, and I listened to every word. I asked questions. Not the kind designed to fix things, just the kind designed to understand. When she was finished, she looked up at me with eyes that were exhausted in a way that sleep doesn't cure. I know what you're going to say, she said. What am I going to say? Leave. Go to a shelter. File a report. She paused. It's not that simple. I know it's not, I said. Tell me what's complicated. She wrapped her fingers tighter around the mug. He controls all the money. I haven't had my own bank account in 3 years. I have a joint credit card that he monitors. He checks the statements. She swallowed. And last year, after one of the times, I told him I was thinking about leaving. He said if I left, he'd tell everyone I was unstable, that I had a drinking problem, that I'd been the violent one. Her voice dropped. He's already started laying the groundwork. Mentioned it to a few people at church. Just casually. Just planting seeds. So if it ever comes out, it looks like I'm the one who can't be trusted. I had heard versions of this story before. In my work, I had sat across from women who were brilliant and capable and had been methodically dismantled by someone who had decided at some point that control was love. The playbook was almost always the same: isolate, undermine, create dependency, build a narrative. I reached across the table and covered her hands with mine. Claire, listen to me. I believe you. Every word. Her chin trembled. I think sometimes that's all people need to hear first before anything else. Not advice, not a plan, not outrage, just, I believe you. Okay, she whispered. I'm not going to rush you, I said, but I am going to help you, and I need you to trust me even when the plan sounds strange. She looked up. What plan? I took a slow breath. The idea had been forming since she'd first sat down, growing from instinct into something more deliberate. You said he controls the money, monitors the cards, checks your calls. You said there are people at church who already think you might be unstable. Is there anyone outside of that circle? Anyone he doesn't know? She thought. My supervisor at the hospital. Lynn. She's asked me twice if I was okay. Anyone else? Maybe Dr. Patterson. He's our family doctor, but Derek hates him. He thinks he's too nosy. I haven't seen him in over a year. I nodded slowly. Okay. I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear it as a practical question, not a strange one. Are you and I still similar enough that someone who doesn't know us well wouldn't tell us apart immediately? She blinked. I mean, yes? We've always looked alike. Why? I told her. I watched her face move through about 6 different expressions. Disbelief first, then something close to fear, then a long pause where she was working through logistics the way I taught her to think when we were kids. Our dad was a retired Army MP, and he raised us both to be problem solvers. Finally, she arrived at something that looked almost like hope. That's insane, she said. I know. He'd notice. Would he? People see what they expect to see. Especially people who are used to controlling the narrative. He expects you to come home from the pharmacy quiet and agreeable. What if you did? But you weren't. You. Her phone buzzed on the table between us. We both looked at it. Derek. She looked at me. I picked it up and answered. Hey, I said, keeping my voice soft, slightly tired, the way she'd been sounding all morning. A pause. Where are you? You've been gone an hour. The line was long, I said. I'm leaving now. Another pause. Longer. You sound funny. I have a headache, I said. I'll be home soon. He hung up without saying goodbye. Claire was staring at me. You sounded just like me, she said quietly. I've been listening to you my whole life, I said. Now, 48 hours, that's what I need. Can you stay here tonight and make an excuse? He'll never believe. He'll believe what you give him. Tell him there was a family emergency. Our cousin Renee. Use Renee. She's far enough away that he can't easily check. Tell him I called and asked you to stay over, that Renee was having a crisis. He doesn't like me anyway, which means he won't want to call me to verify. She almost smiled at that. Almost. What are you going to do? She asked. I'm going to go to your house, I said. And I'm going to make sure that whatever he's been doing, he can never use it to trap you again. The next morning, I drove to the house where my sister had been living for the past 3 years. I was wearing her clothes, a soft blue cardigan she kept at my place, her style of jeans. I'd borrowed her car from my driveway. I had her phone. I had spent 2 hours the night before going through her texts and emails, so I understood the rhythms of how she communicated with him. Short answers, careful language, nothing that could be used against her. He asked questions in a way that were really tests, and she had learned to answer in a way that gave him nothing to correct. I understood what that took. The exhaustion of it. I pulled into the driveway at 8:14 in the morning. The house was a beige colonial on a quiet street in a suburb where all the lawns were tidy and the mailboxes matched, and nobody looked too closely at anyone else's windows. There was a basketball hoop in the driveway that Derek used with the neighborhood kids on weekends. It made me feel sick. I went inside. He was at the kitchen counter drinking coffee, reading something on his tablet. He glanced up when I came in and gave me the slow, evaluating look that I'd been warned about. "You look different," he said. "Tired," I said, moving to the cabinet and taking down a glass. "Calm. Ordinary. This was the first test. Don't react to the test. How's your head?" "Better," I said. He watched me for a moment. I kept my back half turned and focused on filling the glass with water. "You got all the stuff from the pharmacy?" I held up the bag I'd stopped to fill at CVS on the way over. He seemed to relax fractionally. He went back to his tablet. I exhaled slowly and moved through the kitchen like I knew exactly where everything was, which I did, because I'd spent an hour with Claire the night before going through the layout of every room, every cabinet, every drawer. Over the next several hours, I was very, very careful. I answered his questions in the way Claire had described. I anticipated the small power moves, the comment about how the dishwasher was loaded wrong, the question about whether I'd called my mother back, the remark about the neighbor's car in the driveway delivered with just enough edge to invite me to agree or else seem defensive. I gave him nothing to grip onto. And while I was doing all of that, I was gathering everything I needed. My years as a detective had taught me what evidence looks like and where it hides. Derek was a careful man, but careful men still leave traces because they don't believe anyone smart enough to look is ever actually looking. I found the financial documents he kept in a locked box in the home office. The spare key was taped to the underside of his desk drawer, exactly where Claire had guessed it would be. I photographed everything with the secondary phone I'd kept in my bag. Bank records showing transfers to an account Claire didn't know existed. Property records. A life insurance policy taken out on her 8 months ago. I photographed the medicine cabinet, missing prescriptions that she'd been told were lost. I found a prepaid phone in his truck's center console when he sent me out to get something from it. And then, because I had been waiting for the right moment all day, I found his leverage. In a file on his home desktop, the password Claire had given me, his mother's birthday. There was a folder of screenshots, text messages, carefully curated, taken out of context, cropped to remove his provocations. Her words, after incidents, asking him not to tell anyone. Her words, and moments of anguish, saying things that could be made to look like instability. This was the file he planned to show people if she ever tried to leave. This was his insurance policy. I copied it, every single file, because here's what Derek Calloway did not understand about my sister. He had spent 3 years selecting for compliance, and he had gotten very good at reading the woman she had become under his pressure. He had no idea who she was before him. He had no idea who she was before him. He had no idea what she came from. That evening he came into the kitchen while I was making dinner. Claire's recipe, one I knew by heart, and he stood close behind me and said in that low, even voice that I'd been hearing about for months, "You've been quiet today." "Just thinking," I said. "About what?" I turned around, and I looked at him. Not the way Claire looked at him, I suspect. Not the watchful, careful look of someone doing a constant internal calculation of safety. I looked at him the way I looked at people across interrogation tables, the way I looked at men who thought they had everyone in the room figured out. His eyes shifted. Just slightly. "Actually," I said, I've been thinking about the account you opened in March, the one in Scottsdale. The color changed in his face. I don't know what your, and the insurance policy I said, and the folder on your desktop, the one with the screenshots. I kept my voice completely level. I've been thinking about all of those things, and I've been thinking about the fact that I'm not actually Claire. The silence in that kitchen lasted about 4 seconds. It felt much longer. He took a step toward me. I didn't move. I'm a detective with the Fulton County Sheriff's Office, I said. My name is Rachel Mercer. Claire is my sister, and everything I found today has already been sent to 3 separate locations. I paused. You should also know that my former partner is sitting in a car at the end of your street and that this conversation is being recorded. That last part was a bluff. The rest of it wasn't. He stopped moving. What I saw in his face in that moment wasn't the anger I'd expected. It was something smaller and more revealing. It was the look of a man who had never once considered that he might be outmaneuvered because he had never been in a room with someone who couldn't be intimidated by him. You can't, he started. Derek, I said quietly, I want you to think very carefully about what you say next. He thought about it. He sat down. I won't pretend what followed was simple. The next 72 hours were complicated and exhausting and required more phone calls than I can count. There were conversations with an attorney friend of mine who specialized in domestic cases. There were conversations with Lynn, Claire's supervisor, who it turned out had been documenting her own quiet concerns for months. There was a meeting with Dr. Patterson, who had noted things in Claire's medical record that he'd never been able to act on because she'd always come in with Derek beside her. Claire filed for a protective order. The financial evidence I'd gathered gave her attorney exactly what was needed to freeze joint assets and establish economic abuse as part of the record. The screenshots Derek had collected to use against her were now context that worked in her favor. They showed the pattern, the control, the careful staging of her own words. Derek hired a lawyer. He told people at church that Claire had been erratic, had imagined things, had a history of instability. Some people believed him. Some people always will. That's a hard thing to accept, and Claire had to accept it. But here is what else happened. Mara, the friend he'd called, too dramatic, showed up at Claire's door 3 days after Claire moved into the apartment she rented with the first paycheck from her hospital job, which she returned to as soon as the protective order was in place. Mara brought food and sat on the floor and listened for 4 hours. The college roommate, whose name is Dana, flew in from Seattle for a weekend in October. Our mother, who had not fully understood what had been happening, who had made the mistake of believing in Derek's performance for years, sat with Claire in our parents' living room and said the same words I'd said at my kitchen table months earlier. I believe you. She said them over and over until Claire stopped looking like she needed to justify them. And Claire herself. I want to tell you about Claire. She went back to nursing. She is good at it in the specific way that people who have known real fear are good at caring for people who are afraid. Her patients trust her quickly. She knows how to make people feel seen. She told me a few months ago that she finally understands why she went into medicine in the first place. She'd lost track of it for a while, inside that house, inside that life. But she found the thread again. She laughed at Thanksgiving. Not the careful monitoring laugh she'd had for 3 years, the one calibrated to make sure it didn't bother anyone. Her real laugh. The one that filled the room. I cried in the car on the way home. I don't usually cry, and I'm not going to make it mean more than it does. It was just relief, accumulated over months that finally had somewhere to go. People sometimes ask me, in the months since all of this happened, whether what I did was reckless, whether I should have handled it differently, gone through official channels from the start, been more patient. They're not wrong that there were risks. They're not wrong that it could have gone differently, but I've worked enough of these cases to know what official channels look like from the inside of one. I know how long they take and what they require and what they often ask of people who are already exhausted and already disbelieved. I know that evidence disappears and narratives calcify and that by the time everything is in order, things sometimes cannot be undone. I looked at my sister at my kitchen table at 6:30 in the morning, and I saw what another 6 months inside that house would have looked like. I made a decision. I would make the same decision again. There's something I've thought about often in the time since. Derek chose Claire, in part, because she was gentle, because she was warm and accommodating and inclined toward peace. He saw those things as vulnerabilities he could use, what he didn't calculate for. What men like him often don't calculate for is that gentle people come from somewhere. They have people who love them, and sometimes those people have been paying attention longer than anyone knew. Claire called me last week on a Wednesday evening, no particular reason, just to talk. We were on the phone for an hour and a half. We talked about Mom's garden and a book she'd been reading and a patient who'd made her laugh. And at the end she said, a little quietly, "I forgot we used to do this. We can do it every week." I said. "Yeah," she said, and I could hear her smiling. "Yeah, we can." I think about all the women who don't have someone to catch them on the porch, who go back inside alone and close the door behind them. I think about them when I'm sitting across from someone in an interview room and they're telling me something that people haven't believed before. I think about them when I notice something in a waiting room or a grocery store line, some small signal that most people have learned not to see. I see it. And if you're someone who's reading this from inside a life that feels like it has no exit, I want you to know that the exit exists even when you can't see it. It exists because there are people looking for it on your behalf, even when they don't know your name yet, even when you haven't called them, even when you've been told, over and over, that you're alone in this. You are not alone in this. And sometimes, there is a woman sitting at your kitchen table who got there just in time, who believes every word, who is already making a plan.